Now, strap in your seatbelts. We're going to go really fast. This is a 2-hour presentation we're going to do in about 25 minutes. A theme for this year that I've been using has been unsustainability and transition. I think we are, 2013 is a year where we're moving into transition. And we're beginning to see the first fruits of unsustainability. We saw that last night. Most of you are economic junkies, so I bet a lot of you have looked at the Bank of Japan notes. How many of you have already paid attention to the Bank of Japan? Okay. They doubled down. The Bank of Japan did something they haven't done in 25 years. They surprised us by exceeding expectations. I mean, everybody, including me, said, hey, they're going to print, and they're going to print more money than any of us can possibly imagine. And it's not going to have the effect that most of us think it will for a very long time. And Kuroda agrees. Absolutely, this announcement shows that he agrees, because he said, John, you don't understand how much I really am going to print, and by gods, I'm going to get inflation. And we're going to buy anything that isn't nailed down. My only disappointment is that I'm in the process of buying a house, and I haven't been able to get a yen mortgage. I am going to get one, assuming that the yen stays under 100. I may just go ahead and, because I don't think I'm going to actually be able to get the final mortgage until November, because we got to buy it, then you got to build things, but I may just go ahead and position the yen, because I think anything under 100, 7 years from now, is like somebody coming to you and saying, would you like 50% on your money, maybe 100%? It's just as in 2002, when I said, hey, you got to buy gold, it's the trade of the decade. I'm telling you, shorting Japan, not shorting Japanese bonds, not government bonds. Do not think that shorting Japanese government bonds is the same thing as shorting Japan. The Bank of Japan is going to hit that bit. They are going to make those bonds good. And they're going to make those bonds good at that rate. There are other ways to short Japanese interest rates, which are going to be problematic. But shorting Japan is going to be the trade of the decade. And if somebody wants to reduce my mortgage by 40 or 50%, and in the meantime, loan me money at less than 3% for 7 to 10 years, I think I should give them the opportunity to do so. If you want to just kind of pay for me to buy my, dream apartment, I'm willing to take that. So, but that's available because we're in an era of unsustainability, and I want to try to find things that are sustainable. How do we go from unsustainable, the disequilibrium that we're getting ready to enter that John was talking about, to a state where we will have equilibrium? It's basic Minsky. We go from equilibrium to disequilibrium, back to equilibrium. And it is a not smooth transition. And those transitions are kind of like the airplane ride that I came out here with. You get up in the air, it's a little, kind of exciting going up, then a long period of doing nothing, and you're almost there, and then the pilot comes on and says, we're on a hold for another 45 minutes. There is a VIP plane in the air, and we have to wait for them to land at SFO. Just for the record, I think that VIP plane is probably Air Force One. You could hear the annoyance in his voice. So, we think we're getting ready to land, and then the government steps in and makes us wait another 45 minutes. This is going to take longer, guys, than you possibly can imagine. And so if you're waiting to get, you know, your psychological bennies met within a short-term trade, go into another world. It's not, this is going to take a long time. Just be patient. Now, if something cannot be sustained, it will change. It seems reasonable. It's a takeoff on the Ben Stein quote. Not Ben Stein. Ben is the actor. Herb Stein, thank you. I'm 63 years old and I'm beginning to reflect the need for better memory drugs. It seems obvious when you say it this way, but things really do have to change. They cannot stay at this level of unsustainability. Now, what's unsustainable? It's a world in which expenses rise faster than income. That's where we are. It's the old REM song, it's the end of the world, we know it, and I feel fine. Actually, I feel better than fine. I'm excited about the end of the world because it's the end of central bank printing. It's the end of fiscal deficits, the end of sovereign debt expansion. It's the end of, is Greece going to default? You know, I'm ready for that world to end. I would like to go back, and I'm sure John would too, to a world where we can look at markets and go, does this company have a good potential for the future? Do I like its stock at this valuation? I would either like to buy or sell, in Jim's case, okay? I mean, it would be nice just to do like old-fashioned investing, rather than having to look over your shoulder and saying, what's the high priest Bernanke doing at this moment? That's my letter this week, is I'm comparing economics to religion. Not favorably, by the way. What's unsustainable? It's debt. It's the end of the debt, end of the developed world debt supercycle. We're going through those throes. This takes a decade. This is not something like we wake up, well, I mean, Greece woke up and go, oops. Then it's the next country, then it's the next country, then it's the next country. It's going to take a long time. It's going to be a series of, oh my God, can't we just get through this? No. It's a long ride. This is worse than taking your kids from Dallas through the desert into California in a van with poor air conditioning, where it's 110 degrees outside and the screen, the windshield, is 112 and just pumping heat at you. This is a long, frustrating, and there's 5 to 7 kids in the back. Okay, that's a long trip, guys, and that's kind of where we are today. By the way, I don't want to do that again. And when we get through this, none of us are going to want to do it again either. The second thing that's unsustainable is unbalanced entitlement promises, primarily, pension and health care, demographics. My friend Scott Burns and Kotlakoff talk about 12 billion or 220 billion, a trillion rather, of unfunded liabilities. Other people say 70 or 80. I think Stockman's in the 100 trillion now. It doesn't make any difference. I look at that $200 trillion estimate, and I don't even blink. Doesn't worry me one bit. If you sue me for $1 billion, I just laugh at you. You can't get $1 billion out of me. Ain't going to happen. I spit on your $1 billion. If you sue me for $100,000, now you got my attention, because that means you really want my money. You're serious if you go after me for $100,000, because I could actually write the check. $1 billion I can't. $200 trillion, the U.S. economy cannot write that check. It's not going to happen. I don't worry about it. $15, $20 trillion, a restructured economy, lower GDP, higher taxes. Ooh, now that worries me. The question is, what happens on the way to when we figure out we can't pay $200 trillion? When does that moment kind of dawn? Now, it's dawned on a lot of people. Everybody in this room gets it. Bernie Sanders doesn't get it. He never will. I mean, he'll just, it's the fight over whether we should use PCE and chain dollars versus CPI and not chain dollars. Oh, we're taking money from those poor retirees if we use chain dollars. Yeah. And if we'd have used the 1980 statistics for the way we figured inflation, my rough back of the napkin guess is that the cost of Social Security would be 3 to 4 times higher today than it was. Because John Williams tells us that methodology gives us 10% inflation for the last 12 years. Compounded. Which would have affected Social Security. Well, that's patently not happening. What that tells us is that there was no real wisdom in how we figured inflation in 1980. It was clearly, demonstrably, verifiably bad methodology. So we changed it. And then we changed it again. And we changed things in 2000. The surprise will be if we look back in 2030 and we haven't changed it a couple more times. We don't know what inflation is. We're trying to guess and we're getting a little better at it. And in 2030 we'll look back and go, we're better today, but we still won't know. Because things will have changed so much that we're going to have to be changing our measure of what is a moving target. It's close enough for government work. We are going to have to figure out how to deal with entitlements. It's going to cost us more than we'd like. Your taxes are going to rise. My taxes are going to rise. I'm not happy about it. Obama this morning decided that we should cap retirement accounts at $3 million. And I'm sitting there going, really? What a concept. You save all this money and then you just want to start taxing it once you actually get enough to make a useful number? Well, $3 million is too much, John. You should be required to give anything else that you've been prudent enough to plan for the last 30 years to get in there. Anyway. Okay, what is not unsustainable? Real quickly, the world isn't coming to an end, just the government's world. Food, energy, technological change, human adaptation, and mostly importantly, growth is sustainable. We're going to have enough food, we're going to have enough energy at a price, food at a price. It's a clearing mechanism. We're going to see massive amounts of technological change. I took a phone to Argentina with me. It's a experimental model. It'll be out sometime this summer. It's a Motorola phone, smartphone, but it's got Wi-Fi chips in it in addition to being a Sprint phone. $20 a month, all the voice, data, and text you can eat. That's cool. But the real cool thing is I took that phone to the Andes in northern Argentina, northwestern Argentina, and I have made about 15 hours of phone calls when I was within Wi-Fi for zero cost. People would call me on a Dallas number, and it would ring, and cafejate, and we would talk for free. Now that is cool. I'm going to test it in Singapore in 2 weeks, and I'm going to be testing in Brussels in a month. If it works in both of those places, I'm going to stand up and say, boys, we've seen some new cool stuff. And that is one company, it's a significant company that you've never heard of. They handle the backbone for Skype and other groups like that. It'll be everywhere within 3 to 5 years. Everybody will be doing it. It's an AT&T killer. You want to short something? There's a short. I mean, how do they compete with $20 a month, all you can eat? 10 years from now, at $20 a month, is going to be high. Bandwidth is going to be fast and cheap, ubiquitously around the world. We live in a cool new world, and trying to measure what inflation is when it's a very, very personal thing. My inflation rate is pretty damned high. I've got 7 kids and I've been buying tuition. Okay, that's a significant chunk of my personal inflation number. Not to mention that my taxes are going up, which they don't even use to figure CPI. So my cost of living is rising a lot faster than the 2% that we've seen from the CPI the last, and God knows what it is. What is it, John, for the PCE? What's the, inflation's even lower for the PCE. It's a little under 2%, so it's not that much different. What are the current sources of unsustainability? Japan, duh. Europe. Have we ever, the thing that surprised me about Europe is just how ham-handed, and I think the word is stupid, they were with this Cyprus crisis. I mean, what were they, well, they weren't thinking. I mean, we've had 147 financial crises, banking crises in the last memory. I cannot remember one where they said, let's take it from small depositors. Everybody makes small depositors good, even big depositors. You recognize that that's part of the trust built into the system. And when you destroy trust, you have just screwed the transaction, the velocity in the system. For a few $billion, they have possibly really messed up the trust of governments. You're a family office in Europe. You're a business in Europe. Are you not looking around and going, Bill, Jose, Jerome, Friedrich, what are you doing with your money? Are you leaving it in Spanish banks? I go to Malta. I've been to Malta like 5 times. I'm on the board of a company there. Great little country, 500,000 people. It's a financial center. Well run. Great regulatory authority. I can tell you they are on top of their game. Do I want money in Malta banks that obviously Europe now says every bank in Malta is the same? If we take one down, we're going to take you all down? So I'm not really looking at bank risk, I'm looking at country risk. Luxembourg, 300,000 people, 22 times bank assets to their GDP. Now, I know a lot of them are fund assets, and they're segregated. But do I want large deposits in a Luxembourg bank that has sovereign debt in it that hasn't been reserved for? Is it worth my risk? Everybody in the U.S. right now that's of any thoughtful process, you generally move your money around and you try not to go above the FDIC levels. We've been doing that, if you've been thoughtful, for a long time. Europe hasn't been trained that way. That is a disruption to the system. It's not, maybe it's something that should be done, but dear God, do you want to do it now? Not the way to go about it. Maybe you say, people in 10 years, we're going to change the rules. And okay, let's take a deep breath. Let's think about where we want to go, and let's begin the transition. You don't, oh, by the way, you guys are totally screwed if we decide to take your country down. Oops, run for the exits. Bad idea. The U.S., when we're on a panel, John, I want to ask you, when you say, well, the Fed's got to pull it off, what do we do? I'm not so certain they do. They didn't in 1930s. They expanded their base like 7 times and never touched it. Now, and we got a lot of growth after the World War II. I'm not persuaded that the Fed can't just kind of let it roll off and, as they, when they decide to stop doing it and pull, now I'm not saying it'll be smooth, but I don't know that they have to reduce their balance sheet. Excess reserves, as Mish and I were talking last night, there is no such thing as excess reserves. It's a regulatory fiction. I mean, a regulator says, this is excess reserves. A banker might think, no, I think it's an appropriate amount of reserves, and this is how I'm going to run my business. They don't look at that money sitting there, oh my God, I got to do something with it. They say, do I have reasonable places to put my money? Maybe I've got more risk. Maybe I want to keep those reserves. And he says, I've got 5 minutes. Now we're getting ready to go really fast. Warp 7, Scotty. Japan is a bug in search of a windshield. We're beginning to see the squishy sounds, or hear the squishy sounds. The yen has been in the memory of many of us in the room at 260. 150? I think that's a given. 200? I don't know. How fast can we get there? George Soros said this morning when I looked at the Bloomberg that they were going to lose control. I don't like his politics, but when he says something financially, I tend to, think about it, because he's had a few of these currency calls right. It's tough to put the genie back in the bottle when Mrs. Watanabe says, I don't trust you. Or, maybe better, when she says, I trust you to destroy the value of the yen, and I want to get on the other side of the trade. What do we know about world currency trade? That when it's after dinner time in Japan, trading spikes, because that's what the Japanese do rather than watch TV. They trade currencies like we, that's their hobby. And they're good at it. And they know how to go click, 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 dollars, click, 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 German booms. Hey, at 1.25, a 10-year German bond actually might look like a good trade against 0.4 on the yen right now. Okay? I think that trade's going to be pretty good over the next 10 years. I think the dollar will be better, but it's better than sticking in the yen. This is from the BIS. Remember the cartoons and the comic books when we were kids? It says, which two of these look alike? If you fast forward it 4 or 5 years, the two that look the most alike are France and Greece. France will be the next Greece. For entirely different reasons, the French are going to screw up in their own inimitable way. The only good thing that's going to come out of this entire financial crisis is that the French are finally going to get theirs. They are so superior. I system, I socialism. You capitalist pigs, you don't understand. Yes, we do. We get it. And you're a great short. They're getting ready to go what was called for those of us who go back and look at depressionary times, a secondary depression. That was what it was termed. After you went through the depression, you had the rebound, and then you rolled over again. They're getting ready to roll over. It's going to be very uncomfortable. It's going to look like Spain and Italy. And France is going to become a very, very weak partner for Germany. France will be the test of the survival of the euro. Now, the European bureaucrats are committed beyond anything we can possibly intellectually imagine in the U.S. to keeping the euro together. The test is going to be France. If they get through France in the next 3 years, the euro is a currency. Until that time, it's still an experiment. I think we have to assume they're going to do whatever it takes. They are really, 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 really committed. I mean, look at the trillions they've already ponied up. What's another trillion among friends? Especially if the European Central Bank is printing it. It's just digits. Thought about austerity? Of course it doesn't work. It's austerity. What did you think it was going to do? You cut government spending. By definition, you're cutting GDP in the short term. I mean, what else were you thinking? Of course you had to cut government spending. You have run out of the ability to access the market at reasonable rates. That's what the end of the debt super cycle is. Unless you've got a sugar daddy that wants to write you a check, you got to figure out how to reduce your returns. You're a teenage girl. You can't stamp your feet and say, Daddy, give me more, don't take my credit card away. You got to learn to live within the rules. And Daddy negotiates. Okay, cut it back to this month and this month. Okay, here's just some money, but no more. I swear this time it's the last time. Until next month, and we deal with our teenage daughters. If that sounds like experience, yes, I'm not as, I'm a flexible father, just like the Germans are. One bubble to rule them all, and that's the Fed bubble. That's the US bubble. That's the driver. Dear God, we better get it right, because if we don't, the rest of the world is going to be a very, very uncomfortable place. We're seeing a great experiment on economic theories. We're testing the theories of 4 dead white guys, Keynes and von Mises and Fisher and Friedman. And we're really bringing 2 other economists that haven't made that pantheon, but which should, Schumpeter and Minsky, which I think are going to be the 2 economists that we're going to be most thinking about over the next 7 to 10 years. Stability, instability, creative destruction. Economics is religion. John and I, maybe we'll talk about that later. Lauren.
I'll start with one and then I'll throw it to the audience. So you cited Minsky at the end there.
Yes.
Minsky's famously said that stability can become destabilizing.
Right.
With all of the central banks printing, with the huge announcement from the BOJ that they want to double the monetary base in 2 years, reach that 2% inflation target, what is your view on when all of these efforts to stabilize the financial systems or the economies in these countries become destabilizing? I'm talking about central banks.
Well, it's happening, and it takes a long time until it happens, and then it happens pretty quick. I think we have to, as investors, just position for it. I mean, I've been writing that Japan is a bug in search of a windshield now for 2.5, 3 years, but I didn't actually put any money on the table until December. And in December, I took my single biggest investment that I personally made and went short, because it's time. Now, if you talk to Kyle Bass, and I do a lot, Kyle thinks it was going to happen last year, and then he thinks it's going to happen next quarter, and next quarter he will think it's going to happen the quarter after that. That's what Kyle does. I don't know, but I know that it's about time, and since I don't know, if I want to get on that train, I better get on it.
What are you short when you short Japan? Because you wrote recently not to short Japanese bonds.
Well, no, not Japanese government bonds.
Government bonds, okay.
There are other bonds that you can short, and you certainly want to be short the yen. I think a great trade is long Japanese exporters who are intellectual property exporters. Okay, if you've got a high commodity cost in your product, that means if you're pulling energy and steel from outside Japan, you don't have nearly the same advantages as if you're, say, a robotics company, and your commodity cost in a robot is maybe 10% of your product. The rest of it's intellectual property. And Japan's good at that stuff. they're going to make more and more money as the yen goes down. They're going to, we will be buying a Lexus cheaper than a Kia in not too many years. This is not going to make Korea happy. Panasonic and Sony are going to be able to compete with Samsung and LG on price. Who knew? We're getting ready to see a very, very difficult world. I think currency wars in the last half of this decade are going to be far more pronounced than they have been. We just agreed to write a book, my co-author in In-Game. We agreed yesterday to write a book that we're going to call Code Red, after the Colonel Jeffers speech, A Few Good Men, with Ben Bernanke as the feature. You want me on this wall. You want me on this committee. You need me on the committee. I know that my actions may screw depositors, but in the end it saves lives. Okay. Central banks are doing what they think is necessary given the dictates of the religion or economics that they worship at, that they study at. It is going to be an extraordinarily interesting time, but that's lots of opportunities.
Sure. How do you get a mortgage in yen in, say, Dallas? That's my big question.
Well,
I heard someone might be looking to do that.
Well,
a little birdie told me.
Well, I mean, I've got a couple of my friends that have done it, and they've done it synthetically, and that's what I may have to do. I've been actually trying in my letter, and I need to get more aggressive about it. I would like to get an actual straight-up yen mortgage from a bank. I mean, hey, if you're willing to take a 10-year from your government at 1%, I'll give you 2. I'll give you 2.5. Give me that yen mortgage. So, I mean, if not, I'll just have to do it synthetically, and you can do it with futures and options. And it costs a little bit more because you've got to put money up to do that. But I still think it's going to be a good trade.
All right, let's take some questions. Who's got one?
The BIS slide you showed from earlier, I think that came out in 2010 or 11.
Right, 2010, 2011.
It's a good succinct way to show these graphs that we know are never going to materialize in real life.
Right.
600% debt to GDP.
Yeah, it doesn't happen.
So you hit on it in the last 5 or 10 minutes, and up until then, I thought you were going in a different direction, which is we're going to have 10 more years of fires to put out. And my own inclination after work that we've all done in this room is we're going to have anywhere between a week, a month, and a year, and then it's going to be over in a few days, a week.
No.
Where along those graphs,
right?
are we going to hit the Minsky moment where all of the
It'll be different.
top layers have to start liquidating?
And let me repeat the question for the purposes of the video. So where in those graphs are we going to get to where we have the Minsky moment?
And I don't mean a year. I'm not looking for you to call out a month. I'm just saying the reason I even came out of this conference was to get some sort of insight if someone's thought through a catalyst train that I haven't yet.
It's going
What will be the catalyst for the Minsky moment?
Each country is going to have its own catalyst.
You don't think they're tied together?
Greece is not Spain. That's what we'll be told. And then we have a Spanish moment. France is not Spain. Yes, it is, eventually. And the markets will recognize it. And Et-tu, Netherlands? I mean, have you looked at the level of housing debt in the Netherlands? It is worse than Spanish debt. It's worse than Ireland. They've got a real problem. And you think the Dutch, how can the Dutch have a housing valuation problem, a housing bubble? They do. They're underwater. I was waiting for that reaction. It's one after another, and it's just going to seem interminable. I mean,
But you think the fabric of everything from the equity markets to the payment system will withstand some slow equilibrium?
well, yeah. I mean, will we eventually get another Lehman or AIG moment? Probably, but God, it's going to be we're going to see multiple Bear Stearns before we get to a, oh dear God, we've got to redo all of this.
You don't think we have that redo all of it for a decade down the line?
Well, no, it could be 3 years. It could be, I don't know. I mean,
What would be the catalyst that says this is different?
if Europe does something as stupid as they just did, I mean, my view of the potential for it being sooner rather than later changed a month ago. I mean, I thought they were smarter than that. Honest to God, they had pretty much demonstrated a pretty cool ability to kick the can down the road. I mean, just, you know, from a simple admiration of bureaucratic finesse, they were doing pretty good. And then they just stumbled so badly. And now, you know, you do it again, markets are going to go, oh, well, maybe Brussels isn't that smart, which is something everybody in this room probably agrees, but the markets haven't recognized that. So you just have to say, this is coming to an end, and my goal as an investor is to get from where we are today to where we're going to be on the other side. And that may be 2 years, 3 years, 7 years. I'm comfortable. Listen, I would rather it take 10 years. The longer it stretches out, the smoother the vol will be. I like my pain in small lumps, please. I don't want my leg chopped off, just a few whacks here and there.
Let me let someone else go after this.
Yes.
I can't figure out. Because all the metrics are getting worse, and in this graph, accurately projecting to get worse, we don't smoothly go back to equilibrium. We keep going higher and higher on the debt levels, or lower and lower from any kind of potential slow reversion potential. There has to be a day, a week, or a month of reckoning.
You're trying to...
So the question is, will there be a day, a week, a month of reckoning?
You're trying to deal with, and God, I understand and sympathize, you're trying to deal with the mathematical precision of what we think that we have there, but we're dealing with human emotions. And as humans, we don't want to contemplate something that means the end of the world as we know it. We just try to say, okay, we've got it solved. We really want Bernanke to be able to solve the problems. We want Draghi to come in and save the day. We want the Bank of France to figure out something to do. And we desperately want to believe. And yeah, there's a subset of us sitting over the corner going, no, that doesn't work. And mathematically, we're going to have that problem. But the bulk of human existence says we're going to try to avoid taking the logical step and consequences for as long as we can. So it can, that's what I'm saying, this can take longer than we would think. When it happens, it will happen quickly. But, and everybody will say, well, Cyprus is not Spain, except that today in Europe, nobody has to leave Spanish banks today, or Luxembourg banks today. Maybe you should be thinking about Slovenia banks. But you're looking around. You're thinking, well, it might not be a bank run, but it could be a bank walk. You know, it's click, 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 mouth point. I wish I could point to you that says, see this point of the curve? This is where we recognize it. The humans have the ability to ignore reality far longer than, I mean, we're teenage girls.
We're teenage boys. Let's take another question. We have thinking. Yes.
I was a lot tougher on my teenage boys. Let me just tell you. My granddaughters, I don't know what I'm going to do with them. Oh, dear God.
Okay, we have time for one question, so who's got a really good one? You guys want to fight over it?
Oh.
Oh, all right. You win.
I'll try to keep this somewhat brief. Obviously, I mean, one, let's start it that way. But along the way, over the last couple of years, anytime we've come to a critical point where the markets and the governments have met up and there's a moment of decision, the governments have won. When it was credit default swaps in Europe, they didn't trigger. When it was Cyprus and with an election in Germany, they did the dumb thing. What you just said this morning, these suppositions we've had about the retirement accounts and the limits is potentially off the table because we need revenue. Now what I'm wondering is, despite we have this vision of the markets finally taking the governments to task, what if it's the other way around and the governments say, you know what, we don't like this, we're changing the rules. Because anytime I'm in a game and it's for all the money on the table and I'm losing, one thing you can count on, I hate to tell you, is I'm going to try and change the rules. And what I want to know, is there any way of saying, you know, despite what seems so impossible and real today, if these are the decisions that governments have to make to keep the system going so the checks go out so people can pay their rent and eat their food, or they'll vote against them in the next election, what does the scenario start looking like then? And is it really such a safe bet to say the markets will ultimately be the whip that determines what happens?
So the question is, what if governments change the rules to keep the system going? Then does it not matter what markets do?
No. Ask Christina Kirchner or the Argentines before. I mean, you know, the markets eventually rule. In the short term, they can take your pension accounts in some countries. Now, I don't think they will in the U.S. There would be a general uprising if they did, at least in Texas. By the way, did you know that Rick Perry's starting to talk about taking our gold in Texas? What a concept. I didn't realize we had $1 billion. I got to ask Kyle about that, because I'll bet you he's instigated, because I know he and Perry are good friends. That would be an interesting concept. What do we do with $1 billion? Where do we you know, I don't want to store it in Austin. I don't want it anywhere near a politician. But Dallas would be okay. Under my building would be just fine. You have to, as investors, be aware that governments are going to be trying to get into your pocket. I mean, it's the zeitgeist. We have, I can't remember, it was either, Mish will know, it was either 4 or 6 million more single voters this last election, 2012, than we had in 2008. The bulk of them single women, and they voted overwhelmingly for Obama because that is who they see as their support system. They don't have a husband, they don't have a significant other. The government is their support system. And they vote to keep that support system funded and healthy. So totally rational vote from their standpoint. You are their support system. And we need to recognize that we could be in the targets. How do we restructure things? How do we get from where we are today in assets that central banks can't print and governments can't attach to where we'll be on the other side of this? I don't think we're having this debate in 2020. I really don't. I think we may be all through in 2017. I mean, I really think we've got another, I mean, you're asking me numbered years, it's 5 years, 6, 7 years. I don't think we've got 10. But I don't have anything to make you feel good, and I don't have any magic answers. They're changing the rules as we go along, and all we can kind of do is try to anticipate what humans have done in the past. We have to pay more attention to Washington, D.C. I'm just been asked to join a committee to help, you know, educate certain politicians. The rules are flexible.
They are flexible.
Thank you very, very much.